a member of the London Maritime Arbitrators Association, and he was the Honorary Secretary from its inception for many years. He's still an arbitrator. Now he's chairman of the London Maritime Arbitrators Association, and he's vice president of the Institute of Arbitrators. He personally will introduce members of this panel who will answer all the awkward questions I was proposing to put, because I hear they've been written in. Mr. Hutt, will you introduce your panel? Thank you.
Lady, I think it is, and gentlemen. As David Frost would say, hello, good evening, and welcome.
Goodbye.
It's my pleasure to introduce my colleagues, a trio of gentlemen whose names are bywords in the field of maritime arbitration.
Byword?
They are certainly known to, and many of you, personal friends of a lot of this audience. But I know you would like me to say just a few words about each of them. On my right, Mr. Richard Clyde, a founder committee member of the LMAA, past president, past chairman, and now one of our two honorary members, the other one being Mr. Bunker, who hoped to be with us tonight but can't make it. A lawyer by profession and one of the few men whose letters need no signature. In the words of Mr. Justice Donaldson, in his judgment recently on a special case of Mr. Clyde's, his wholly distinctive style adds leaven to dough-like facts. That I can vouch for. On my immediate left, Mr. John Chesterman, also a founder committee member of the LMAA, immediate past chairman, and now president of the association, and past president of the Institute of Arbitrators. By profession, Mr. Chesterman is a chartered shipbroker and chartered secretary, and he's an authority on the restaurants around and in general. On my far left, Mr. Cedric Barclay, a committee member of the LMAA and immediate past president of the Institute of Arbitrators. It's difficult to list his qualifications. Shipbroker, engineer, naval architect, marine surveyor, ship's manager, ship owner, plus a wonderful flair for organising conferences and taking up at least half of the agenda on any committee in which he sits. All of these gentlemen are practicing arbitrators and acknowledged leaders in their field. They also have another thing in common. They are all brilliant linguists. I am proud to lead such a team this evening. I have one great advantage over them there. In my capacity as chairman this evening, it's up to me to decide which member of the panel I should direct questions to, and with luck, I can steer the awkward ones their way. As you know, and as you've heard from Mr. Turner, we invited written questions for this evening's forum, and we received many. However, we've had no rehearsal, and we will not necessarily be talking with one voice, and the views that you will hear will be the views of the individual members, especially on some of the more controversial matters. I must admit, we had one or two questions which said, we have a problem. These are the facts. What does the panel think? Now, clearly, we cannot deal with this type of question. My only advice to the questioner is to refer the dispute to arbitration. In London, of course. As has been usual in previous forums, each member of the panel will be invited to make a contribution on each question, unless, before it runs its full course, the question's been exhausted. One question comes from Mr. Lentakis of Pegasus Chartering. I don't know if he's here this evening. Is he? No, he's not here this evening. But seeing that it was through his suggestion that these forums were started, I think it's only right he should be first. Mr. Lentakis asks, and by the way, there will be opportunity for questions from the floor later on. He asks, the law relies strongly on precedent, and case law is freely available to assist the courts in their judgments. Does the panel think that previous arbitration awards should be similarly available to assist disputants before they had to resort to litigation or further arbitration? As two other questions more or less cover this field, I'll group them so that the three may be answered as one. Mr. French, of Fenton Steamship, asked, can a precedent in law in UK arbitrations be used in New York arbitrations and vice versa, and if not, why not? And Mr. Robbins of Shivers asked, could the London Maritime Arbitrators Association establish an organisation to which Baltic firms could subscribe, which would keep subscribers regularly informed of cases arbitrated and results? So you see what's running through those three questions. And perhaps I would ask Mr. Clyde to open here. Mr. Clyde.
Mr. Chairman, gentlemen, the difficulty about the establishment of an arbitration award as a precedent for other and similar disputes is great. Basically, an arbitration is private. And it is almost impossible, we have thought when we've been considering this question in the past, it's almost impossible to publish sufficient of the facts to enable people to understand what the dispute was and how it's been decided without revealing the parties. And they would be perfectly entitled to object to that. Furthermore, of course, and this is the only other part of this question which I'm proposing to trouble you with my answer to, if I may use that expression, the only other difficulty is that the courts, who do establish the precedents by their decisions, follow them as best we can, as they wind their way up from first instance to the House of Lords, being constantly reversed in the process. The court won't recognise arbitration awards as precedents, and therefore an endeavour to make them precedents would be dependent upon their acceptance as precedents by the next disputants, and the courts would not give any support to such an acceptance. Can I leave it there because there are some other aspects of the matter which others than I are better able to answer?
To add something there.
Yes, I think that there is a grave difficulty here because, as Mr. Clyde's already said, it's almost impossible to issue a précis of an award without letting out who is there. And if you come back to the basis of arbitration, which is, I venture to say, subject to contradiction, that the whole basis of it was you and I can't agree. Let's ask Fred. He's been in the business all his life, and right or wrong, we'll accept what he says. That basically is commercial arbitration. But if you're going to try and bind Fred with somebody else's decision, you're not going to get what you really set out to get. I think most disputants really want what men of experience think as a personal view, and by and large, right or wrong, they accept it. And I think it would destroy this atmosphere if you tried to make arbitration awards as precedents for future awards.
Well, gentlemen, there may be two answers to this question of precedent. The ordinary English award doesn't state the facts. It just recapitulates the claims, and it says John pays Jack so many pounds. And therefore publishing that award would not create any precedent because you wouldn't know what it's all about. It's strangely enough, when the award is in the form of a special case, it does create a precedent, not directly, indirectly, because if the case is set down for hearing before a court of justice, all the findings of the arbitrator are stated, and if you read through Lloyd's list, you will find the whole case outlined with the judge's comments, and in the end, that is a case which, according to the judge's decision, may create a precedent insofar as the law is concerned. Thank you, Mr.
I was going to say that exhausts that question, but I better not duck the issue. My view on this is that there is a demand and a call for reasons, which Mr. Barclay touched on. Certainly the parties want reasons, but we won't go into the advisability of reasons or non-reasons tonight. But we have tried this in the past. People have asked us for this. We've tried it. In fact, the Honorary Secretary of this association offered to précis reasons and delete names, and one or two of these were tackled. In fact, it wasn't possible to continue because we haven't got a professional or paid secretariat, and there's a limit to which you can work your honorary professional advisor. My own feeling is that there is a need. One is always hearing people ask for this, and I would like to see some way found of dealing with this. I venture to suggest that some way will be found, and that it is possible to précis. I understand that at least one of the P&I clubs is doing something like this because they have the facts available to them, and they're précis down until there is some value from them. But it is very difficult. If I may go on to question 2, so as we press on a wee bit. And question 2 has 2 parts again. Mr. Rennick of Westralian Farmers says, or asks, is not the appointment of an arbitrator too often meant the appointment of somebody to argue the case on his client's behalf, and what can be done to strengthen the meaning of the word arbitration? With which I link Mr. P.G. Reed of Kentships, who asks, as in the court of law, the litigants are unable to select the judge and jury, what are the panel's views on the fact that each party to an arbitration is allowed to choose and appoint an arbitrator? Presuming that the panel approve of this procedure, would they not agree that it tends to lead to each arbitrator preparing and presenting the case of the party nominating, that is, performing the functions of both the solicitor and barrister in a court of law, with the inevitable result that an umpire has to be selected to act as an independent arbitrator? Under these circumstances, would it not be preferable for parties seeking arbitration to apply to the LMAA for the appointment of a single arbitrator? A longish 2 questions, really, but there's a connection between them. Mr. Chesterman may like to start now.
Yes. I don't think that the appointment of an arbitrator by an associate body is a good thing. It is true that the majority of people who appoint us as arbitrators really haven't very much idea of Russell on arbitration, and that they are supposed to act in a judicial capacity. Because I get many, many appointments which finish up saying, no doubt you will do your best for us, which isn't really the spirit of arbitration. But if one bears in mind that the majority of arbitrations come from foreign disputants, and I think I can say you could count on the fingers of one hand the number of arbitrations I've had where both the disputants are British, and count on the fingers of both hands the number where even one of them is British. They're usually both foreigners. Quite often they know nobody in London, except perhaps their broker, who probably caused the trouble anyway, and they don't want to go to him. And I think they do appoint us as advocates. And the courts appreciate this and realise it, and the courts themselves raise no objection to it. Judges have a pleasant habit of referring to us as arbitrator advocates. But this doesn't make a tremendous amount of difference. I think it's quite right to say that with the majority of us, if the two arbitrators can agree that one or the other party is right, they will issue a joint award. And I would say probably 50% of the arbitrations in which I am engaged finish up as a joint award. And it's only when the two arbitrators genuinely cannot reach an agreement, as we did this morning, that we go to an umpire and throw the can at him. But I think that basically the majority of them do appoint us as advocates. But there's a special, as I say, a special reason for that. But it doesn't alter the fact that at least, I would say today, 50% of our awards are joint awards. And that's not a question of conciliation between the two parties. Either one is right or the other is right, and a joint award is issued. And it's only when they genuinely can't agree that they appoint an umpire. On the question as to whether it would be better to appoint a sole arbitrator right from the beginning, I must confess that in the past I've often thought that this would be a good idea, but I've so often heard people say, well, look, this is going to be argued by counsel or it's going to be argued by solicitors. Have an umpire there, but for heaven's sake don't disagree, because we want the benefit of your experience. After counsel or solicitors have finished their job, we want you to be there, and your co-arbitrator, to discuss the thing again in the light of all your experience with your umpire to help him to make a decision. And I think that to an umpire this is very helpful indeed if he can get the views of two arbitrators, which may differ, but at least he doesn't find himself following one line, which very eloquent counsel may lead him along. He's got somebody else who'll just push him off that line and give him something else to think about.
Thank you. Mr. Barclay.
In practice, and in this country, gentlemen, there are four kinds of arbitration. There's one by a single arbitrator who has no allegiance to any party, hasn't been appointed by anyone in particular, but perhaps by agreement between the two litigants. Then there is the arbitration where you have three absolutely independent judges, not necessarily nominated by the parties, perhaps nominated by an association. Then you have the threefold arbitration where you have an umpire and two arbitrators who are advocates. And then lastly, and in technical arbitrations this does apply, you have in practice a sole arbitrator with two assessors who call themselves, or assistants if you like, who call themselves either experts or arbitrators. Now in technical arbitrations this works extremely well because there isn't much to fool around with in technical problems. It is perhaps a matter of optics, but there are none of the intricacies of the law. It's pure fact. And therefore these two experts assist the arbitrator, they don't really argue. But in the case where you have an umpire and two arbitrators who are acting as advocates, you must remember that most of the arbitrations we get in London are between parties who may be domiciled, one in Patagonia, the other one in Lithuania, and who are not present in London. And they want somebody to expose or present their case to the umpire. And they feel that the arbitrator they have appointed in the first place, who has full knowledge of the file and the submissions, is the man perhaps best informed to present their case. And that is why they ask him to act as an advocate before the umpire.
Thank you, Cedric. If I keep the strict order, it's my turn now, gentlemen. I think the answer is this, or you've heard two answers here. I would just draw your attention to part of that question again. It said, two being appointed to present the case with the inevitable result that an umpire has to be selected to act independently. Well, you've heard, of course, that this is not so. there is this feeling that always the two arbitrators disagree and appoint an umpire. You've heard it is not so. There are many cases where it's a sole arbitrator. When two sit, they technically sit as a tribunal, and only when they disagree do they change their hats and become the advocates for the parties, which is peculiar, in a sense, to London arbitration, to maritime arbitration. Most other arbitration in this country does not have that practice. It is my experience also that certainly not less than 50% of arbitrations where two are appointed go to a joint award. Not less than 50%, probably quite a bit more. So I think you will see that it is not inevitable. In fact, it is less than 50% of the time. Anything to add, or is it mostly about what you're saying? The next question. It's not 3 now because we've joined several together. This is from Mr. P.P. Click, and it says, what steps is the committee of the LMAA taking to ensure that maritime arbitrations in London are handled by members of the LMAA other than the present panel this evening, thus giving younger and less experienced members a chance, and also expediting London maritime arbitrations? Now this, I think, is one of the most important questions we have this evening, because this troubles many people in the LMAA, and maybe in this audience as well. So I'll invite, in the same order, Mr. Barclay to answer first.
I hoped I wouldn't get this one, but anyway. It's a question of selection of arbitrators, and there are many difficulties. You see, maritime arbitration covers a very wide field. Contract, chartering, shipbroking, law of damages, construction, all sorts of problems. It is usually difficult to find an all-rounder at the age of 25. He might be very well qualified for this, but people would not normally think that he's able to adjudicate. So obviously there must be an age limit, which in its wisdom the Common Committee may fix today and vary tomorrow. It is also a question of a man's background and his experience. And the LMAA is very careful when choosing or selecting arbitrators to keep a relatively small list, because this isn't the sort of association, but more an institution of people with a certain definite experience. We publish a list, and I can assure you that our selection committee as such does a very good job. But not everyone who is in the city as a shipbroker or a shipowner or a charterer would normally qualify. I don't want to enlarge on this because our chairman, of course, has more to say on this than I have. So may I pass this on to you?
Yes, Barclay. I think, as a matter of fact, the question was a little different from that one. He actually said to ensure that maritime arbitrations in London are handled by members of the LMAA, other than the four you see before us. Now, really, this is a question that has exercised the mind of the committee, and something has been done. It is not a question of certain fashionable schemes deliberately trying to halt the number of arbitrations that are made. I can assure you that one of my colleagues here has deliberately decided 2 or 3 years ago to deny himself certain types of arbitration so the load be spread. Another one does similarly for other reasons. Always we ask the people who tend to appoint arbitrators most this try and spread the load. I've yet to hear a chairman's speech at our AGM, or for that matter, a chairman's speech at the annual dinner, where many of these people are present, where this hasn't been mentioned, and sincerely mentioned. I have before me a list of members, not a list of members, this is a letter that went out covering a list of members in 1970, where the secretary said, I won't read it, it takes up too much time, but where he was virtually informed. The people to whom this went very large distributions, do this very thing. He then quoted a statement of the chairman given in the AGM. So a lot is being done. We're alive to this, and we are trying to do something about it. But you've only got to think to yourself. it's very fine to say, why isn't the load spread? Why not give it to any number of men who may be qualified? But just think, you have an arbitration. It's very important to you because you're one of the disputants. Do you go along and say, oh, I'm quite happy to have one of 50 or one of 100? It's just human nature to say, no, for this particular one, because I'm involved, I want Mr. So-and-so. He may not be the best man, but you know him. And I think this is what happens. You're strictly next, John.
I've advocated this for a very long time, but there is really nothing that the LMAA can do. One of the beauties, if you like, of arbitration is that the people are entitled to choose their own tribunal. And the courts are very keen on this, because if you go and say to the court, well, this man's mad, this award is absolute nonsense, the court will simply turn round to you and say, well, you chose him, what are you grumbling about now? We have no power at all to appoint arbitrators. It's entirely in the hand of the litigants, but some of us have adopted this attitude, saying, well, look, I'm terribly busy, I won't be able to touch this for years. May I suggest that you go to somebody else and we give a list, perhaps 3, whom we would recommend. And this doesn't always work. We often complain that the clubs probably could spread the load more, but then the club is in the position of having to recommend people. And I can see the difficulty from a club's point of view of recommending an untried arbitrator. Because if he did make a mess of it, it's going to bounce back onto the club. And I don't think there's anything that the LMAA can do more than the individual members are doing in trying to spread the load. And we'd like to see it spread.
There's only a tiny thing to add to that. I entirely support the idea that that's what we have been trying to do, to get the load spread. People of my age have at least got this consolation. I remember a musical comedy actress of charm and originality, whom I used to know in the old days, was asked not very, actually soon before she died, bless her, is there anything in your life that you regret? And she said, yes, there is. And they said, why, what is it? She said, there's been too bloody much of it already. Never, this problem will solve itself. We are not immortal. But I can add my assurance. We are doing what we can to get the load spread, which people are more prepared to do, because even if they say, oh,
I think we'll have one more, shall we say, meaty question before we go on to some quickies and turn to the audience. This is the next one. Would the panel agree that the role of the arbitrator is to cut? I thought it was going to be signed a friend. It's my turn to start off. My own view is that nothing is more misunderstood than the special case of the English law. Not only in the United Kingdom, but abroad. And I have here before me a translation of a learned professor's paper that was given at Le Touquet, and it starts off the shortcomings of the English system of arbitration and certain advantages of French law. And I'm not going to bore you with it, but I can assure you, clearly, most of it was sort of clear about the kind of man who could Clark got an arbitration reporting out of the Lmaa House and Law. We've all heard this sort of thing before. So one had to say something about that at the time. But the fact is that special cases are rare. My own experience is that if 1 in 10, 10% or less, all right, 5% of arbitrations are special cases, this some legally, they are published widely, Lloyd's List has it the next day, and so these are the cases people come to see. Many people say cases are very, very useful. So this is one thing I want to stress. There is no reason, there is no chance this will change our accuracy in English law, and on occasion it's a very valuable process. First part of the question, whether the arbitration more and more popular, and not only in the American field, but in all other fields, in the internet, motor trade, consumer associations, the travel agents, they are all working together to have arbitration rather than litigation. It's becoming very, very popular indeed. But you mustn't think we're the only ones who arbitrate. We like to think ours is the best type of arbitration, but many others arbitrate. And so, certainly, he says, as most awards do not seem to be upheld by owners of legal charters, another fallacy. Of course some are not upheld. People aren't ideal. But once again, it's the question of the one that isn't upheld being used, and the hundreds that are not being used. No one knows anything about them. So that isn't so. Generally speaking, most awards are honoured. When they are not honoured, there is a procedure. It doesn't always work, but there is a procedure, but it is fortunately fairly rare. Mr. Clyde,
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm of the view that neither the arbitrators nor their roles are yet wholly defined. There's a lot of activity going on. I'm not certain whether the question was designed rather for this point, but it doesn't really matter what the arbitrators say, because one party or the other will support and get financial principle and get to award and there is only this point to remember, that if there is a question which can be, the decision on which can be of importance in a lot of others, then as we can understand the precedent, it's not a bad idea that the award which takes in the case even then the role of the arbitrator is all important, because he's got to be quite careful not only to find the facts accurately, because the judge can't go behind you, but to find all of them and avoid that annoyance and humiliation of the judge saying, oh my God, I can't decide on these facts, it's better go to the arbitrator to find what the facts really were. The role of the arbitrator is all important there, and it would be a great pity, in my view, if he were regarded, or his role were regarded as defunct.
Only one thing to say, and Mr. Clyde did touch on it very lightly, arbitrators quite often, when they're asked to state a case, refuse to do it. Because if they feel that, as Mr. Clyde said, the dispute is not one that's worth going to the courts about, they refuse to do it. Then it's up to the party asking for it either to go to the court to force them to do so or just accept the arbitrator's decision. And it is interesting to note that more and more the courts, if the arbitrators refuse to state a case or the umpire refuses to state a case, more and more the courts are agreeing with them and upholding their decision that there should not be a case stated. But I do agree with Mr. Clyde that there are some points that if they're going to affect a great many people in the future, since we can't establish a precedent, it's not a bad idea to have the precedent, even if it's wrong. At least it brings finality to the particular clause that's being disputed. And then all you fellows have got to do is devise a new clause, you see, and then you get another series of litigations and you start all over again. But at least you do know what the particular clause you're arguing about means, because the courts have told you what it means.
Thank you, Mr. Barclay, would you like to add, or would you like to go straight on to a quickie?
Say a few words on this one. It can be, this can be chopped up into two: disregard of an award or appeal from an award. Disregard from an award, which is a simple, straightforward award, is usually on the ground that it cannot be enforced where the loser is located. And that is purely a matter for the solicitors to handle. The award is out, it's for them to try and procure enforcement in the country of the loser. Now, unfortunately, international conventions are not signed by every member state of the United Nations, and sometimes there is difficulty in enforcement in certain countries. Of misconduct. But an appeal in a special case system, which I think my brother Chesterman and I will agree is no more than 2% of the total of cases heard in this country, appeal is in a number of different forms. There is appeal in most foreign tribunals. In fact, if you read the Arbitration Act that's called the USSR, you will find that an award produced by the Maritime Association there has to be approved by the Attorney General of the Congress to cover the court. Therefore, appeal is we are not alone in this situation. It may not be exactly in the same form as inherited law, but there is a figure before the rules which make in other countries in
Seeing Mr. Barclay's in full flow, I'll keep him going on the next quickie if you take it straight away. This is Mr. G.N. Ayatru. I hope I haven't pronounced that wrongly. Adolphe Vigotis. Have the panel any knowledge of maritime arbitrations held in Peking, and if so, what are the major differences between Peking rules and those of London? And a similar question, J.S. Thurman of Trudos Shipping. Arbitration Peking/Warsaw/Moscow are common terms to some charterers. Have any results been forthcoming? Can this be considered as good, bad, or unchangeable? Are London arbitrators excluded from any of these places? Would you like to have a quick
I can't answer tribunal, but there are two arbitration tribunals. One is arbitration tribunal and the maritime arbitration tribunal. The maritime arbitration tribunal has 25 members elected every year, and they are elected by the presidium of the Chamber of Commerce. The hearings are public. And you must remember this, that practically every tribunal outside this country asks you to put up 2% the amount of stake in the respective arbitration. So this is, now if you make a claim for £100,000 and the counterclaim for another £200,000, you have to put up £6,000 before you start arguing. This is a major factor in most arbitration.
Exchange, the parties to the president of the association, and the president of the arbitration, can also ask for security. In other words, if there is, you might explain the distance of the court, and as well also the protocol before the hearing. You are also subject to the 7-day or 10-day time limit, for example. Also in really dependent. There and in Australia you have 10 days in which to respond to the respondent arbitrator. It's rather a tight limit. You also have to send in your full submissions together with your application, and you are not necessarily invited to appear at the court. You are also asked whether you want an oral hearing or a hearing on documents. It's a sort of procedure is very different from our own, and that you have more efficiency in the sense that you have very
on these quickly, I'll just ask each member of the panel. I wonder, Mr. Clyde, you might take this one from the
this person seems to be not only against it, a piece of wishful thinking, groping after something which would be lovely and desirable if we could get it, but in the way of which there's all manner of legal objection. I think the idea is this. Charter has been signed, and the moment it has been signed, it is realized that there's some horrible snag that will come and bite somebody, one of the parties in the backside, before the Charter runs its course. The idea is that before that trouble happens, finality and certitude be reached by having a rapid hearing in order that the committee should in wisdom decide what the parties really meant or should not. Now, it's candidate to be deciding questions about it before you know what the facts are, the effect of the group, particular dispute, how do you know it? Secondly, and even more importantly, it cannot be the legal position, as I understand it, though I appreciate fully that the asker of that question is more legally qualified than I am. It cannot be the position that the brokers have authority from their principals to submit to a committee arbitration, a quick one, a dispute that is going to arise between their principals without giving their principals full assent to what they're doing. And if they are put in that position, then A, they have got to disclose the fact that there's some horrible knockout somewhere in the wording, or they think there is, and they've got to get their principals' agreement to get it submitted to this type of arbitration. A lovely and desirable idea, but
there will be opportunities later to ask questions, gentlemen. We're not just carving them up like this. Another quickie.
yes.
And London arbitration clause is anyhow very there has to be sometimes this does. One remembers the case where a charter party was drawn up in Piraeus on a London form. But the parties were agreed, it was signed in Piraeus, the freight was in Drachma, and many other things like this. And it was decided by the arbitrators that Greek law was allowed to apply, and the way they got over this was, not knowing Greek law themselves, they appointed a Greek lawyer as the umpire, and the case was heard before him. And it was a result that was satisfactory to both parties. But the answer to that is yes. The next quickie, quickie coming to him, I think, yes. Can you explain the working of the time bar in relation to A, the central charter parties, and B, general?
The central arbitration clause is a very dangerous clause. A lot of people don't realise that a claim put in has to be stated. It need not be quantified. That's to say, you've got to state, for example, that you have a claim for dispatch, and you must appoint your arbitrator. They're the two things you must do before the 3 months is up. And just on the side, an arbitrator's appointment is not complete until A, you've asked him, B, he's accepted, and C, you have notified his acceptance to the other side. Now, if you've done all that, and the other side don't comply, and this is where the danger is, if there is contact, and this so often happens, for example, where confidential rules, if the charter will deduct from the freight a damaged cargo claim. Now, the owner has a very simple claim in law. It's a claim for debt. The statute of limitations applies there, so he's got 6 months. 6 years, sorry. But the charter often doesn't realize that with regard to the counterclaim, which is his claim for damage, he is the claimant. So that if an owner sits on his claim for withheld freight 3 months and the charterer does nothing about it, the charterer may easily find himself in a position that the owner is still having a debt due to him for his freight. The charterer is time-bound under the sense clause because he's done nothing about his counterclaim. The claimant in the Central Arbitration Court is a bit misleading because in a counterclaim, the counterclaimant is in fact paid. If he wants his counterclaim to be heard, he has got to signify the claimant, notify the other side of the claim, and get his arbitration claim. Now, the time bar, just one last word, is of course a perfect defence to any claim. If you can show that the thing is time barred, then you're home and dry. But you've got to prove it. It's no good sitting back and arguing the case or anything like that. You have actually got to say, this claim is time barred, and then you're home and dry. But if you don't say so, it's no part of the arbitrator's job to say, this claim is time barred. You must plead the time bar to get the benefit of it.
Okay. Before we go on to another meaty question, there's just one last quickie here, which Mr. Barclay might like to take. It's from Mr. N.F. Ledwith of Thomas R. Miller. He says, in what ways would the panel like to improve the list of arbitrators now available?
It's not less good.
I think Mr. Ledwith may want the answer that we elect him to the Lmaa.
Yes. The free choice, they can have a lift man if they like, and he doesn't have to be a member.
True. What Mr. Ledwith may mean is to improve the standard of the present members, or those that are coming on. Well, it's a hopeless, of course, yes, that's the way it says. But we do run training schemes, and certainly we do take a lot of notice of new applicants. We only consider applications once a year at our February committee meeting, and we do try and have a ceiling of 50 members. We have gone slightly over that, but 50 members really. The idea is that we are not in any way working, to use an insurance term, for a premium income at all. We don't want sheer numbers. The Institute of Arbitrators, for instance, is an institute, a very large institute, that encourages people, as long as they're qualified in certain professions by examination, to become members, as long as they have an interest in arbitration. We like to think that we are an association of arbitrators. And although it's certain, it is a fact that not every one of those members arbitrates, more arbitrate than one would think. I would say half of them certainly do. Although, once again, it's fair to say that a few have more than many of the others, but many do arbitrate. We do try, when we consider these applications, to look at many things. Firstly, if the man is experienced, if he is likely to be, in the opinion of the committee, good material for an arbitrator, if he's judicially minded. It's no good having a very brilliant man who won't look at a thing in a neutral way and in a judicial way. I don't know if we want to say any more about that.
No, I think
not to be quite such a quickie in the end. Here's one from G.D. Bottrell of Norton Rose, Bottrell-on-Roche. Do the members of the panel generally find it of assistance to have solicitors and or barristers at commercial arbitrations? Would it not be possible for the arbitrators, when they've disagreed, to drop out of the arbitration altogether, leaving the dispute to be determined solely by an umpire? This would have the advantage of releasing two arbitrators who could be dealing with other arbitrations. One, of course, assumes in putting this question that neither arbitrator has been requested to act as advocate. That's a very strong question.
Well, no, it's a bundle of about 6 questions, I think. The first question was whether the panel felt that the importation into the disputes of solicitors or barristers was a good idea. Now, I have no hesitation whatsoever in saying that the importation of the right kind of solicitor is a tremendous benefit to a tribunal, and the importation of the ordinary jatterbox commercial person, such as a barrister, is a thoroughly negative. They spin the thing out. They take 3 days to do what could have been done in the morning, and certainly they waste the time of the tribunal in a manner which is excessive. The next part of the question, if I remember, was would it not be a good idea for the arbitrators, when they have failed to agree, to drop out and leave an umpire sitting all alone somewhere and you can say, well, with all respect, who the hell is going to go out? Who do you doubt? I suppose the idea is that the tribunal having insisted that the tribunal is free, because you don't have the expense of an umpire all the time, and then the arbitrators, having explained the matter to the umpire, then drop out. Then that question would be a sensible question. But in the ordinary course of things, when it's just an ordinary maritime arbitration, an umpire is ordinarily, whatever course there is in the arbitration dealing, not until the umpire you can't be about stranded with a bunch of undigested, probably indigested wallpaper and ask them to find a result from the and therefore, broadly speaking, I should have thought that the answer to the question is this. It's part of our job, as I see, even if we fail to agree, to give the umpire all the assistance that we can give them in trying to reach a right decision. All right, say that we agree. It doesn't end my job where I persist in freedom. I've now got to try to explain to the umpire why I think that I'm not really an income going to say to him. And therefore I should have thought that the idea of dropping out before you can get one out of the is not a question of the job people think you're
as far as that has this type of arbitration clause in it. It is not usual to have it in arbitration, but in maritime documents it's very usual. And I suppose one of the reasons is that maritime arbitration is essentially an international affair. As I think one of the members of the panel said earlier, it's very rare to have a British disputant. I don't think it's exaggerating to say that 95%, certainly in my experience, of disputes are where both disputants are foreign. And this, I think, has something to do. They like someone to take over the dispute and is to start. You've heard that this strictly is not true. Nevertheless, they want him to continue in the race.
My part, I'm not going to be like it, but the whole thing is just something. Doesn't complete me. On all the occasions, any of the getting my ticket, or that you have to listen to use a certain portion of state. But remember that most arbitrators are commercial men. And so you can train them to commercial men. But the very easy and traditional ways learn how to sound the contract. People say, obviously that's a bit like realism. Now regarding the question of the outline of arbitration for keep in mind that when there is an arbitration, a full-scale arbitration with solicitors and clients, usually the two arbitrators have not yet heard the case. They are presented with a bundle of documents at the very beginning. Very often what the two arbitrators make
we find it very helpful if somebody is after a special case and draft a new award.
Clearly, with all of these meetings, and it's this, I think it's quite important. It may be basic, it may be elementary, but many people don't know. Several wrote it in this way. When a broker is asked by a principal to submit a dispute to arbitration, what steps should he take? Simple enough. Well, I think it might be. I would say the first step is to ask the contract and this sounds very important. If you're not careful, you will find yourself appointing arbitrators and that sort of thing, and then you'll find it says Arbitration Moscow. This sounds extraordinary, but in fact it has happened when two of us got to the stage. This doesn't deny us the right to travel to Moscow. It doesn't mean you have to have a Russian when it says Arbitration Moscow. But clearly this wasn't intentional. The way that was got over, they had another reference. Very no. But look at that. Also, for the very obvious reason that there may be it's not much good if you're asked 4 days by the end of continuous in beautiful, but there are pros and cons. So I would say this is one of the main things.
That's the initial stage. Then again, quite often a broker may be
asked to put a dispute to arbitration and can the arbitrator solemnly starts to rule, he makes no proof of those law, and only to find a court of the way to the problem.
I think the other two members have a burning desire to add to this, and I'd like to perhaps look at this. Well, no chance so to answer that. Now is your opportunity. As you see, I left very little time. Now is your opportunity. Anyone who wants to ask, if not, I've got plenty of witnesses. Stand up, look around, identify yourself, and over you come through something. Okay? And maybe I thought, yes, I won my bet.
Gentlemen, I can only say to you, and I'm sure many people here think, that the highest tribute I can pay to you this evening is that you are as solid as the FCC. I myself have just this asked for our return from you, and I would like, if possible, to clarify the question that I have raised in writing to the I think an absolutely vital matter, one I was discussing, that is the question of arbitration is to be done Gentlemen, let me put this to you, and I would like to call that arbitration is is to be considered as existing. This must not be. I heard it said in New York back a few days ago, and one of you, learned gentlemen, has just been appointed for and one of the comments from colleagues was, you've got a couple of days to see. This is a point not to see Patagonia. Let's forget about Patagonia. Let's realize this business is a national business in all over the world. We are going to allow this system of violence to work itself one passiveness and a certain amount of smugness, then we are going to get nowhere. We must move to a system whereby certain quite consistent things can and should be available on an instantaneous basis. I'm quite happy to discuss with my brother Clyde, if I'm allowed to call him brother, the question of whether this could or could not be done. We know it can be done on the floor because we are practically shipwrecked and we know perfectly well that many of our disputes arise very early on, long before the passage of time has allowed the whole thing to know. And at that time, with agreement, certainly we will get it from our continental and overseas friends, a reasonable panel of accepted commercial shipbuilding people who were presented with a placing of the two particular points of discussion with very